This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week is episode 636, and we welcome Dr. Joe Lstiburek to talk about the life and times of the Dean of Building Science. Looking forward to a fun show today. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. They are the reason we can continue doing the show. Our marquee sponsor is Instascope at instascope.co. Our association sponsors are the American Industrial Hygiene Association at AIHA.org, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists at ACGIH.org, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute at CIRIScience.org, the Indoor Air Quality Association at IAQA.org, the Restoration Industry Association at restorationindustry.org, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at IICRC.org, and Healthy Buildings America 2021 at HB2021-America.org. Industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories at AEMLINC.com, Particles Plus at ParticlesPlus.com, Grey Wolf Sensing Solutions at GreyWolfSensing.com, TSI Inc. at TSI.com, Sunbelt Rentals at sunbeltrentals.com, April Air at aprilaire.com, and Healthy Indoors Magazine at healthyindoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Philip Rauscher, Cincinnati, Ohio, who was first to identify 1946 as the year the ACGIH adopted its first list of 148 exposure limits, then referred to as maximum allowable concentrations. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, August 13th, 2021, has been sponsored by TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for the monitoring of indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Name the building-related, nonprofit, non-governmental organization established by the U.S. Congress in the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, Public Law 93-383. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Cliff. Dr. Joe Lstiburek is the founding principal of the Building Science Corporation and an ASHRAE Fellow. He's a building scientist who investigates building failures. His doctorate in building science engineering is from the University of Toronto. He's been a licensed professional engineer since 1982. The Wall Street Journal referred to him as the Dean of North American Building Science. Dr. Lstiburek is an acclaimed educator and has taught thousands of professionals over the past 4 decades and has written countless papers. Welcome, Joe. Great to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's from one Joe to another. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Let's get right into it. Joe, how did you get started in the construction world back in the early days of before, I guess, the first energy crisis?
Well, my father was a home builder, and I learned from him. He was also an aeronautical engineer, and I, of course, was smarter than him, right? When you're a teenager, you're lots of your father, and I, Dad was clearly an idiot, and I was smarter than him, and I went out on my own, and within 2 or 3 years, I realized my dad was a genius, and I was the idiot, and I was putting my way through university. I was in aerospace, engineering physics at the University of Toronto, and building homes on the side, and so it was. I guess it was inevitable. I followed my dad's footsteps. He was in the aeronautical area. I went into aerospace, and we both ended up builders. And I admired and loved him and respected him at the end. But man, the early part, I thought, come on, Dad, that's stupid. Boy, was I wrong.
So how long did you stay in the construction industry? Well, you're still in it in one way or another, but
well, I was a home builder for 3 years, a serious home builder for 3 years, and I built 30 houses, and they were, well, at the time, insanely high performance, and today they'd still be viewed as high performance houses. And I thought I really had it dialed in, and it turned out that I had some of it dialed in, but I didn't really know what I didn't know, and that's always a problem.
Yes, it is. Well, where does the term building science come from? You've turned it into something that everybody kind of recognizes, but back then, I don't think it was.
No, I had no idea what building science was. I ended up at a home builders conference committee meeting, and some old guy was talking about under slab water vapor management, and I disagreed with him, and I said, well, that's ridiculous. And he had these glasses, and he put his glasses down on his nose, and he looked at me and he said, young man, you need to go back to high school and relearn your high school physics before you can play in the big leagues here. And I was about to yell at him, and another old guy sitting behind me put his hand on my shoulder, and he gave me this look, and he said, step outside. So I went outside in the hallway, and he said, come on, let's go upstairs. I want to share a drink with you and tell you some stories. And so I went upstairs. I didn't know this guy, and he introduced me to something called single malt scotch. And I'd never had a single malt scotch before. And he says, my name is John Timisk. I'm a professor of engineering and building science at the University of Toronto. And that guy that told you needed to relearn your high school physics was Professor Gus Handegord of the National Research Council of Canada. And he is one of the best who's ever lived. And he gave me, he just wrote this book. It's not officially published yet. It's loose leaf. I'm one of the reviewers here. And it was called Building Science for a Cold Climate. And I mean, I was like stunned. I spent the whole night reading the book. It's now obviously a legend. And so, the same night, I insulted one of the legends, was rescued by another one of the legends, was given a pre-publication book of the legendary book by Handegord, and then Handegord and Timisk and I became lifelong friends. They were both my mentors, and Gus went and became the very first official speaker at summer camp. And so when he retired, it's a funny story. I then, knew that I didn't know stuff, and I had a case studies class at the University of Toronto, Handegord, and I took it 8 years in a row. I took the same class 8 years in a row. The university fund said, "Stop this! I keep paying you. We can't take your money. So I mean, I can attend as a guest and not pay you. No wonder you guys are losing money." So when Gus couldn't take one of the classes, I would fill in. And so when Gus finally retired and he donated all those papers to the University of Toronto, the part of the stipulation was that I had to take over teaching his class. So I inherited Professor Handegord's class when he retired. And so I still teach it today. So that was my introduction to building science, by insulting one of the greatest, being saved at the same time by another one of the greatest. So that's how it started.
I think we've got a photo of one of the greatest here. John, the group photo, can you put that up? There we go. Tell us about this one, Joe.
All right. Well, that's when I was a home builder, and I'm the guy beside the guy without the shirt. That's James Lishkoff, who became a famous consulting engineer in Ontario. The guy on my right hand is Professor John Timisk, and the young kid at the far end is Chris Timisk, who's now a full professor at the university in Ontario. And we're actually building the world's first dynamic wall house. And Professor Timisk couldn't get anybody to build it. And so I said, well, Professor, Jim and I will build it for you. So I went out and we framed the first dynamic wall house. This is in 1982.
When you say dynamic wall, what do you mean by dynamic wall?
Well, the idea was that Temesk wanted to turn the wall into a countercurrent heat exchanger by having a semi-air permeable material on the outside and operating the building under a slight negative pressure. Air would be pulled through the membrane and through the insulation system, and it would be warmed up by the conductive heat and going in the opposite direction. So the idea is that you could get an infinite R value by simply picking up all of the air, all of the energy going outward by pulling it, warming the air coming up inward. Then the issue is that how do you establish the negative pressure and recover the energy? That was done with one of the world's first air source heat pumps, which was part of the energy exchange. So it was like insanely elegant, and it worked about, wasn't 100%, it was about 60% efficient, which is remarkable. But it all became passé because continuous exterior rigid insulation makes this unnecessary, and it was really difficult to have uniform airflow around the interior gypsum board. So in other words, it worked, but it wasn't ultimately practical. But man, it was real nice to learn, and it was like, to the day they both retired and died, I still remained young Joseph. So I qualify for Medicare, but I'm still young Joseph.
Young Joseph. Joe, let's look at some of the other work you did back in the early days. John, you want to pull up a couple of those photos? Let's maybe walk us through this.
This is 1979, and this is one of the first perfect wall houses. It's a water-managed EIFS before they even knew that there were significant problems with synthetic stucco. So this is a super insulated at the time masonry wall insulated on the exterior with 6 inches of continuous rigid insulation with synthetic stucco, and it was insanely tight. And I created my own blower door. But it was a fan in a window, and this was about 2 air changes per hour at 50 pascals in 1979, and this was in about 4 hours north of Toronto, Ontario. And the reason I could get away with building is that they didn't have a building department, so I didn't have to get a building permit. It freaked everybody out. You can't possibly do this. And so I did it because I could, and it was spectacular. The next image, if you punch it up.
Go ahead, John.
That's the interior. So we're taking an exterior split rib decorative block CMU and putting it on the inside and exposing it. That's the interior finish. That's the thermal mass. We've got the timbers. And then next image. A fluid applied water control, air control, and vapor control layer. That's the black. And then over the outside of that is the 8 inches of expanded polystyrene. So the next image. So there's insanely super insulated, right? Mass to the interior. The best windows at the time were, believe it or not, double glazed, but we had interior storms. So we basically made a triple glazed window, which wasn't available in 1979. Next image. That's the insulation. We had to figure out a way of attaching it. So long screws with plastic washers and a plug. And man, it was awesome. And I built 30 of them over 3 years and only lost about $500,000. And one of the jokes of the day was that, famous home builders asked, well, what would you do if you won the $1 million lottery? And his answer was, well, I'd probably keep on building until it was all gone. And I got out of business. I had to. Interest rates went to 20-21% in the industry.
Yeah.
And so I was without a job and got hired as the youngest ever director of research of the Canadian Home Builders Association. And I developed the R2000 program. And the reason that I got hired, I was one of the only people that knew about ultra energy efficiency in a cold climate. And so I was like, 26, 27 years old. And I didn't know but I knew Handegord and I knew Timisk, and they kept my sorry butt out of trouble.
Now, I'm curious, how did you heat these?
This one was, believe it or not, was heated with a wood stove.
Okay, I believe it.
We needed combustion air. Duh. You know, this house was tighter than a Scotsman in a bar, and I needed to have air come in because it was important not to kill people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd you pull that off?
Put a hole in the wall, connected a duct to it, and ran the duct to the underside of the wood stove. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Ducted makeup air. Hey, I was an aerospace engineer. I knew this airflow stuff.
Hey, let's go back. I want to show today's what you call the perfect wall, no longer the dynamic wall, I guess, but the perfect wall. Let's take a look at that.
Well, okay. So for the record, I did not come up with this. All I did was take a 1953, 1954 black and white image and add colors to it. I'm the Ted Turner of building science. I colored up this old stuff. This was put together by Professor Neil Hutchin, and Hutchin was Gus Handegord's mentor. So my mentor's mentor came up with this. And basically it's the structure. The black lines are the water control, air control, vapor control layer. The blue line is the thermal control layer. And the reason it's blue in this image is because Dow paid me to make it blue. It's pink in another image, and that's from Owens Corning. And then the vomit orange is Rockwell. So, you know, the color of that layer is going to tell you who was paying me at the time to do the presentation. And
Gotcha.
then a back ventilated and drained cladding. Now, I couldn't figure out why this wasn't catching on. And so I named it the perfect wall. And it caught on. And so people say, well, Lstiburek invented the perfect wall. Well, no, Lstiburek coined the phrase the perfect wall, and he basically took a 1950s concept, added colors to it, and said, look, this is the way it should be. So this was figured out before even I was born, right? But, you know, people don't read old stuff. People certainly don't know what works and what doesn't work. And just a little background, I spend most of my time dealing with failures. I never get a call saying, Joe, things are going great. Come on, let's have a beer. I get the call, the vampires are coming. It's the end of the world. They're taking my family. You got to save my sorry ass. And so it's failures, and failures turn out to be more educational than successes. And I like to point out that, failure has made me the man that I am today.
Go to the next slide, John, real quick. This is a little more detailed, Joe.
Well, yeah, this is the perfect wall. All I did in my houses, and I didn't know I was building the perfect wall, was I just put the stucco directly on the blue layer, and I made the blue layer thicker, and I had drainage because of the I didn't appreciate that I had drainage between the back of the foam and the water control layer because of the attachment methods. And so I ended up with a water managed synthetic stucco before people knew that phase sealed synthetic stucco wouldn't work. So, I mean, one of my big predictions was before the synthetic stucco industry went to crap, it was like the babe calling the shot, saying the industry's going to fail. I knew it was going to fail because when I didn't have that water control layer and I didn't integrate with the windows, I had to fix the damn buildings. So I screwed up first.
Yeah. Well, somebody had to learn those mistakes, learn from those mistakes early on, Joe. Another thing I think we learned from was the first energy crisis that came about. And then, people started tightening up buildings, trying to save on the, oil and gas prices going crazy. You were part of that. Tell us a little bit about the mistakes we made during that time and why they were made.
Well, you had activists and people who don't understand physics. Let me explain something. We're doing the same stuff incorrectly now. And what happens is that politics trumps physics. Am I allowed to use the word trumps? Politics Obama's physics, beginning. But physics wins at the end. And so we ended up doing all kinds of stupid stuff. And I pointed out that with Gus's help, but I made the mistake of speaking publicly. I said, look, there's no such thing as a free thermodynamic lunch. If we add all of this insulation, we're going to reduce the energy flow, which is yay, okay. But energy flow had provided the ability for the assembly to dry. So when we insulated up the wazoo, which is a metric term, it's two yin-yangs, we ended up dramatically reducing the ability of an assembly to dry. So to stay in moisture balance, we had to reduce the wetting potential. So we had to change the way we installed all of our windows and doors and did all of our flashings and whatever. And people were not wanting to hear that. And so I kept saying, look, you don't understand, we're gonna rot thousands upon thousands of houses. And oh, by the way, these houses are heated with, oil furnaces. And if we tighten them up, people are going to die from carbon monoxide poisoning. And you can imagine how popular that was when this, youngster at the time saying houses are going to rot and people are going to die. Well, I was blacklisted. I lost my job. I got fired because I testified at a coroner's inquest from a family that died. I lost my job the day my daughter was born. That was a real exciting thing. And
wow.
I ended up out of work. My wife left me. I couldn't see the kids. Living in my mom's basement, driving a rusted out Ford Tempo. But it turned out that I ended up being correct. And so I didn't give up. My dad kept saying to me, he says, come on, Joey. By the way, he was the only one that could call me Joey. You call me Joey, Joe, you're dead. Okay.
I won't do that. My mother calls me Joey too.
He says, look, I fought in the Second World War. I lived through the Depression. I was shot down twice. I fought the communists. I had to escape behind the Iron Curtain. And you're whining a little bit because they're annoyed at you because you're arguing about some physics. Suck it up, Joey. Don't give up. And I didn't. It was hard for a while. I ended up working in the United States because nobody would hire me in Canada. And so I ended up in Chicago and developed the first spillage and backdrafting tests, and then did a call-in show called House Mender Does House Calls with a guy by the name of Jim LaRue out of Cleveland, where I was explaining to everybody, well, here, look, if you add all of this cellulose insulation into these uninsulated walls, the paint falls off. And the paint falls off simply because not the cellulose is wet, it's that the walls are always getting wet from capillarity from the outside. And it always dried out because of the escaping energy. What happened is that the insulation reduced the energy flow, reduced the drying potential, the wall stays wetter, and the paint fell off. That was my first real technical paper, insulation-induced paint and siding problems, and it was selected to be represent Canada's paper at a huge international conference, and I couldn't afford to go, so Hannegord and Timmis paid my airfare so I could present the paper. And at the end of the paper, Timmis waves at me, and I go to the hotel room attached to the conference, and in the room is Gus Hannegord with a glass of scotch. He gives to me and he says, well, young man, you finally learned your high school physics. I started crying. That was when I was officially part of the club. And so then, then I started getting more and more work, but in the United States, not in Canada. I really didn't, it broke my heart. I couldn't, these people were mad at me because I said polyethylene vapor barriers are going to be a problem. This insulation is going to rot your houses, and you're going to have air quality issues. And I said, look, I'm an engineer. I have a genetic defect. I believe in efficiency, but you don't want to make people sick, and you don't want to kill the house. So we can have all of this, but it's not as easy. And stop listening to these people with PowerPoints who wave their hands around and think that they know about the physics. That's just not the way it works. That was not a popular message. So guess what? Now, green, right? It's easy, right? And there's the COVID stuff. It's easy. We're just going to increase the humidity and ventilate. And I'm going to say you have no freaking idea what that's going to do. And, I like to describe myself as, remember that television show in the 60s, Rocky and Bullwinkle? And
oh, yeah.
at the end of the show, the credits, you show that old guy with the mustache sweeping up the elephant pit after the parade. That's what I do. After the parade is over and the elephants are shit all over everything, I'm cleaning up the mess. And you know the mess is coming, and you try to warn them. And you gotta go through it. So we're going to go through stupid stuff. Do you realize what 40 to 50% relative humidity is going to do to houses and buildings in the cold climate, right? You realize how difficult it's going to be when you want to double your ventilation rate for COVID. So you're going to have to buy humidifiers in the north, dehumidifiers in the south, ERVs, and you're going to have to figure out materials that can tolerate being wet. Good luck with that. And so I want to retire. I can't. Come on. Jeez. So I'm going to look, we figured out after the first energy crisis what to do, but it took almost 20 years. We're going to learn faster with this mess, but we're going to end up doing stupid stuff first. And we've already got code changes coming that are this is done by activists who've never done anything. They don't have to live with the consequences of their stupid decisions. And I like to point out, now that I'm a full-fledged American, one of my heroes is Winston Churchill, and he said, Americans can always be counted upon to do the right thing after all of the alternatives have been exhausted. So we're going to do all the stupid stuff and then get it right. But that's the way we do it.
John, let's go back. I want to show that picture from Cleveland. Yeah, there we go. This is a younger version of Dr. Joe here. And tell us a little bit about what was going on here, Joe.
Well, Gus said, young Joseph, you understand how the inside of a wall works. You have no idea about the outside. You ought to go to someplace like Cleveland or Pittsburgh, and they're having all kinds of paint problems. Go figure out what's going on. And so I didn't know. So I drove to Cleveland, and I met kind of a church-going guy who does LaRue, who did all kinds of stuff with low-income housing. And he did a call-in show, and I did a guest hosted, and I slept on his couch, and I said, I want to look at peeling paint. Anybody got any peeling paint? And we got like 1,000 notes. And so I spent the next 8 months every weekend driving from my mother's basement, because I was now broke and living by myself again, and looking at paint problems. And that led to the insulation-induced paint and siding paper that got me that award, and got Gus to tell me that I'd finally learned my high school physics. So here I am taking cellulose out of a wall that had peeling paint, and the building was 20 years old, no paint problems at all. And then they blew it with cellulose. The paint fell off the next year, and the pattern became pretty obvious. And I said, well, my God, this is awesome. Somebody should write it up. So I did. And that was me. And my God, I was 30 years old.
Wow. When did the Building Science Corporation start?
1989 in Chicago. And
okay.
you're going to laugh, but with the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement just passed, I needed to be able to figure out a way to work in the United States. And the only way that it would work is if there was an American company that hired me. And at the time, I was dating an American immigration attorney who was working on the Free Trade Agreement. And she said, incorporate a company in Chicago and then write a letter to invite you to work for it. And so I incorporated a company. I called it Building Science Corporation because why not? I wrote myself a letter of employment. And when the Free Trade Agreement passed at midnight, at 1 minute after midnight, I was at the Sarnia, U.S. Port Huron border, and I was literally the first person that got admitted. And I had this this letter of employment that had 5 things on it, and they called me in, and they're on the phone to the people in Washington, and they're like, okay, it needs to have 4 things. And of course, I numbered them 1, 2, 3, and 4 because I knew what the agreement was going to be. And so I drove off to Chicago, and so Building Science Corp started in 1989 in Chicago.
Wow, I'd never heard that before, Joe. Hey, we've got to stop and thank our sponsors. We'll be back in 2 minutes with the second half of our interview with Dr. Joe Lstiburek. Our marquee sponsor, Instascope. More jobs done faster with the future of IAQ assessment technology. Unlimited samples, instant results, and cloud-based data at instascope.co. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World at AIHA.org. ACGIH, Advancing Careers of Professionals in Environmental Health, Industrial Hygiene, and Safety, interested in defining their science at ACGIH.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute. See more deeply through science and research at CIRIScience.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association, promoting the exchange of indoor environmental quality information through education and research at IAQA.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry, network with leaders at restorationindustry.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at IICRC.org. And Healthy Buildings America 2021 in Honolulu, Hawaii, November 9 through 11 at hb2021-america.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories, free shipping, great pricing, same-day results with no rush fee at AEMLinc.com. Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us at particlesplus.com. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, over 20 years manufacturing accurate, reliable IAQ instrumentation for portable, short-term, and continuous monitoring at graywolfsensing.com. TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. Sunbelt Rentals, availability, reliability, and ease for all your IAQ and restoration needs at sunbeltrentals.com. April Air, healthy home at aprilaire.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online magazine for industry professionals and consumers at healthyindoors.com. All right, we're back with the second half of our interview. Dr. Joe Lstiburek. Cliff, I want to turn it over to you for the next question.
Thanks, Joe. Joe, looking back over your illustrious career, what single best piece of building science advice did you get, and who gave it to you?
Oh man, that was it was pretty easy. Gus Hanegard, he said, "Young Joseph, the three biggest problems in buildings are water, water, and water." The three biggest problems in buildings are water, water, and water. And of the three biggest problems, which are water, water, and water, the single most important one is rain and groundwater. If you can't handle rain and you can't handle groundwater, nothing else matters. And that was the biggest single piece of advice that I ever got, and that's the piece of advice that I give to everybody else. It was funny, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at ABBA, the Air Barrier Association of America, and I told them they should have been called WABA, the Water Barrier Association of America, before ABBA, that all of their air barriers are really water control layers that have an air control function added, and that the water control function is way more important than the air control function. But that came from old Gus to young Joseph.
Young Joseph.
Joe, let's go back. You started Building Science Corp in Chicago. You ended up in Westford, Massachusetts. A lot's happened between then. Can you tell us a little bit more about the early days of Building Science Corp?
Well, okay. Nobody would hire me. I couldn't even speak at conferences. I was literally blacklisted. And so I started organizing my own conferences. So, if you sons of bitches aren't going to let me present, I'm going to have my own conference. And so I got into doing seminars. And so the seminar business started simply because, and training started because I couldn't get work, and I couldn't get invited to conferences. I mean, I was literally thrown out of the first EEBA conference in Rochester, Minnesota. I developed something called the air drywall approach, and I wanted to present it, and it was accepted at first at CESCI, Solar Energy Society of Canada in Vancouver, and then they dropped me and said, "We're not. You're too disruptive." And so, Timus bought me a plane ticket, flew me out. We rented a room next to the convention, and I presented it to 50 people in my hotel room. So I presented the damn paper anyway.
Wow.
And so it was pretty brutal. And people say, "Well, gee, Joe doesn't like to fly. That's why he drives everywhere." That was crap. I couldn't afford a plane ticket. I had to drive. The only credit card I had was a Shell credit card. And so, driving a rusted out Ford Tempo, 14 hours to do a presentation in Atlanta at a session I've arranged myself because nobody would freaking invite me. Well, I had to do it that way because I had no, but then, I started, people started saying, "Well, wait a minute, he fixed this, and he fixed that, and he fixed this." And this is going to sound really weird, but the breakthrough happened. My big passion besides drinking wine is skiing. And I was a ski patroller for 25 years. And the reason I was a patroller is I couldn't afford lift tickets. I lied about my age when I was 17 and joined the patrol, and I became overtime director of Alpine Rescue. But I would drive from my mother's basement to Aspen 24 hours by car to sleep illegally down valley in a parking lot and ski the next day. And the reason that I would go to Aspen is because they were the only big resort in the United States that had reciprocity with the Canadian Ski Patrol. So if I could get my ass to Aspen, they'd give me a lift ticket. And so it was awesome. And so one day, and I would occasionally give a class to Colorado Mountain College. There's a crazy guy by the name of Johnny Weiss and another legend, and I would teach classes. And so the idea is that, hey, you can sleep on my couch, Joe, not in the parking lot anymore, but you got to teach a class. And then I would go ski 2 days and I'd drive home. I would do this once a month. And so one day I'm skiing and it's miserable, disgusting. It was like ice fog, and there was nobody on the hill, and I'm skiing something called a run called Ruthie's. And I'm the only person on it except this insanely good babe, female skier. And she's just, and I'm doing everything I can to try to catch her or keep up with her. And after 3 top to bottoms, she stops at the bottom of the lift, and she's talking to the lift operator, and they're both laughing as I come up, right? And because there's nobody else. And she says, "I figured if I didn't stop, you'd kill yourself. Come on, get on the lift and tell me your story." And so I'm going up the lift, and I says, "Well, I'm an engineer and I investigate building failures. I can't tell you how unbelievably stupid architects are." "Who are you?" "I'm an architect." I said, "Are you that guy that's been teaching Johnny Weiss's class?" And I said, "Yeah." And I says, "Well, we've been real busy. She was with a big firm called Hagman Yale Architects at the time. We got a big project coming up. After skiing today, you want to drop by and tell us a little bit about stuff?" And so I had my Kodak carousel, slides. Remember that? And
yeah.
And I went in and I talked about unvented, vented roofs, continuous insulation, rain screening, conditioned crawl spaces, condensation dew point, balanced ventilation. And they said, "Wow, this is kind of cool. What would it cost for you to do a design review?" And I said, $2 a square foot, figuring it's a 2,000 square foot house, right? She says, okay, thank you. Right. So I drive back to Toronto, and a month goes by, and I get a roll of drawings that's like this big, like it's unbelievable.
Wow.
And I call them up and I say, are you serious? This is a house? This is 50,000 square feet or more. I said, no, it's 66,000 square feet, not counting the 4,000 square foot guest house. Is your fee still good? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
At one thought, I said, whose house is this? He said, well, we can't tell you. And I knew right away. So I said, it's the prince's house, isn't it? It's Prince Bandar. He was the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States at the time. And so I did Bandar's residence, and he had, super insulated roof, no ice dams. He had triple glazed windows. It was just perfect. And on that job, the part-time building official taxi driver, Steve Knipe, was, asking all these questions. So he's just a taxi driver. Well, he's became a lifelong friend, and he now is the chief building official for ASTM Pitkin County. The builder was a guy who drove a rusted up pickup truck from Indiana. His name is Steve Hansen. He's become the most successful home builder in Colorado. And they became lifelong friends. And so, this Bandar thing allowed me to stay in business. So I meet this beautiful architect that you are aware of. I'll tell you that story in a minute. And we're working out of her basement in Boston. And this guy with a very, very, very heavy Japanese accent calls me up, and I'm talking on the phone. And I said, you need to come out to Hawaii right away. And I thought it was a joke. And I said, screw off, Lishkop, I don't have time for this kind of shit. And I hung up. Well, okay, about an hour goes by and I get a call saying, Mr. Lstiburek, I wasn't a doctor yet. Mr. Lstiburek, this is the Consul General's Office of Canada calling from the office in Boston, and you've caused an international incident. Well, that gentleman that you hung up on was Yoshida Toyota of Toyota Motor Company.
Oh,
I said, why the hell? How would he know to call me? Well, his good friend, the Prince Bandar, recommended you. And I'm like, how did they find me? Toyota called the National Research Council of Canada. They wanted to know some Canadian who skis in Aspen who knows buildings. Everybody freaking knows you, so they gave him your name. And so I went off and I did Toyota's house. It was the first unvented conditioned attic in a hot, humid climate. His neighbor was Charles Schwab, so I did Schwab's house. The other was Colbert, Kravitz, and Roberts. And so all of a sudden, I'm doing rich people's houses all over the world. And they also give money to hospitals and museums. Well, what are the most screwed up buildings on the planet from a moisture and physics perspective? Hospitals and museums. So
yeah.
The hospital and museum business, because I was skiing a miserable day with Heidi Hoffman in Aspen, and that turned my career around.
Wow. All right. I've got a sentence I want you to finish here. An architect and an engineer walk into a bar.
All right. So I'm doing one of my sessions in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and there are like 35 people in the room, and it's a 2-day session. And I spend the entire morning just tearing the butts out of architects. I can't believe how stupid they are and screwing stuff up and whatever. And so at lunch, of course, I work the room. You go to every table, because I'm the host as well as the presenter. And there's only one woman in the entire class. And I look at her and I'm at the table and she looks at me and she says, you'd be all right if you weren't such an asshole. You must be an architect. And she says, as a matter of fact, I am. And I said, so maybe dinner's out of the question. And she said, maybe not. And that was Betsy Pettit. And we've been together for over 30 years. So I met her. And the reason that she came was that she was in charge of fixing the EIFS, external insulation finished buildings that were all rotting and failing as a result of mass housing. and she was in charge of fixing it. One of my buzz lines in the promo was the fundamental flaw of the IFS. And we became obviously business partners, and we have had a magnificent, wonderful relationship. And she's an awful lot smarter than me, and so she lowered her standards to be with me. I married up, she married down. What can I tell you?
That's great, Joe. That is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about summer camp. How did the idea of summer camp come about? When did it start?
Well, we moved into our new house, which was an 1880s house that was more or less falling down. And old people who I respected were beginning to die. And I said, my God, we need to pass on the information. And we had Betsy and I had now a couple of employees, and we're sort of saying to ourselves, what's going to cost, a couple of $1,000s, maybe $5,000-$6,000 to send our people to a course at a conference like an EEBA conference or an ASHRAE conference or something. And I said, well, they suck. I mean, people only speak for 20 minutes, and the real action happens in the hallway or at bars when you get to talk to people. And this is nuts. And I said, well, why don't I get the smartest guy I know? Why don't I get Handegord? And I called up Gus and I said, what could you teach? Could you teach us everything that you know in 3 days, and what would it cost? And he said, there's no way I can teach you everything I know in 3 days. I can teach you only everything I think you folks can absorb in 3 days. And it's going to be $10,000. And I said, okay. So I had $5,000. I needed to get another $5,000. So I sent out, you're going to love this. I sent out 10 letters saying, Handegord's going to speak at our place for 3 days. Can you cough up $500? I got 20 checks back. I'm like, wow. Okay. So the first morning, I'm saying, look, this is not meant to be a profit. I was just supposed to, break even. What if I give you back half of your money? And he says, you're nuts. You know how difficult it was to get money out of our company? They have no idea how we're going to get it back. Somebody yelled it up, spend it on food and booze. And I said, okay. So I go off at lunch and I buy all kinds of stuff, and everybody comes back to our house. That means 20 people, right? And I'm grilling and drinking and having a good time. And this guy walks up to me and he says, "You're screwing this up. This is you're drunk. The food's falling into the ground. You're burning the food. You're a freaking embarrassment." And I said, "You could do better." He says, "Anybody could do better." I said, Here's my credit card. Take over. And, the next day we have dinner again. And it's this insane spread of absolutely freaking magnificent food. It was just like, you're kidding. And people were and that guy that did that, his name is Pete Consigli. There he is.
Wow. There he is.
So at the end of the third day, everybody's just overwhelmed with Gus's presentation, overwhelmed with Pete's cooking skill and his sense of humor and the interaction, and everybody was together, and you got to do this again. So the next year I invited the best European by the name of Hugo Hens, and I invited the same 20 people. Well, I got 50 people. And so Pete couldn't cook just by himself with 50 people. With one of the people that was attending was Jack Springston. Remember Jack?
Oh, yeah.
Jack put himself through university as a short order cook. So,
yep.
And Springston were cooking. The trouble was it went from 50 people to 500 people. And so our 23rd summer camp, this is a picture of 500 people in my backyard. And we went from cooking in my our kitchen. I ended up building a commercial kitchen for Pete and Jack and crew. So it's used 4 days a year. Consigli was a legend. And it grew out of, you're getting old and you're going to die. You got to tell us everything before you die. So then the joke was, well, you only get invited to speak at summer camp if you're old and are going to die soon. And so then we had to, and it's kind of neat. The folks that present are freaked out, right? It's incredible pressure, right? And I'm trying to tell you, look, relax. It's just, you don't understand. These are the greatest people in the world. I can't screw up. And, calm down. It's okay. And so we have it's become a wonderful, wonderful cult. I can't tell you, the presentations have been spectacular. Some have been world premiere. One of the guys, famous guy, would come in and he would just sit down and start playing at the piano. And he was a dead ringer for Steve Martin.
Steve Martin. Okay. Yeah.
Like Steve Martin. And so he was a dead ringer and he started playing and people would come up to him and say, "Are you that guy?" And he says, of course I'm that guy. And so people say, well, how did Joe Lstiburek get Steve Martin to play a piano at summer camp? It wasn't. Steve. It was very, very famous glazing consultant who did the investigation of why the glass fell out of the Hancock building. And so summer camp number 3, he bursts in the middle of the presentation and says, the non-disclosure has been lifted. I can tell the truth. I can tell the truth. I can tell the truth. And so it was the world premiere, first time in public, where the actual failure of what happened in the Hancock building was released publicly. And there were like 4 people in the class that were part of the litigation. And they're saying, really, we can talk about this? It was just, that was magic or spectacular. And then, my favorite presenter, Mac Pierce, he presented twice and he got standing ovations and unbelievable. This is my favorite picture of him. He's holding a bottle of Sassicaia, which was my favorite wine of all time. And what an amazing, I miss him. He passed recently, and what a legend. But we've had everybody. Well, everybody that not yet, but we want everybody.
You're getting there, Joe. You're getting there for sure. Hey, let's go to I don't know. Can you stick around an extra 5-10 minutes or?
I have no friends, so I'm happy to.
Well, then let's keep on. I want to keep going a little bit. I want to get to some current events here. Let's start with code. You've been trying to change code for many, many years. How long have you been trying to change code, and what was the biggest thing you got changed that you're proud of?
Well, I've been in the code making since, I guess, 1999, 2000, when I was whining about how stupid the codes were. And a woman by the name of Shirley Munns came up to me and said, well, why don't you freaking change it? Why don't you get involved? Stop whining and complaining, get your, and so, wow. Okay. That put me in my place, and I learned the code making thing. And so my proudest was that I changed all of the requirements for vapor barriers throughout the United States. So that was change number 1. You don't have to have a vapor barrier if you meet these other requirements. Next change was I changed everything with respect to vented and unvented roofs in all climates. Next change was vented, unvented conditioned crawl spaces. So conditioned crawl spaces, conditioned attics, vapor barriers, all were work that I managed to get in. And it wasn't easy. Most of these code changes take 3 cycles, so 9 years. So, I'm dealing with the 2023 code, and the 2021 just got whatever. We've got changes coming, and and simple stuff takes freaking forever. All I want now is to have return air allowed out of basically closets. Do you have any idea how difficult to get a simple change like that is? I mean, I got people yelling at me and calling me names and whatever. It ain't easy. But those are those are a big deal.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. The crawl space thing, I think, has changed a whole lot of people's thoughts, and solved a lot of problems for people too, because that's just huge. But they're still doing it wrong too, Joe. I don't know how, but.
Oh yeah, I just want you to know that there's always going to be somebody that's going to say, well, you did this wrong. And they probably did. But there's always somebody else says, well, if you did it this way, this might be better. And you'd be surprised at how much I've learned from younger people who refuse to be told they can't do stuff. They remind me of me. And that's how you break boundaries. And I love listening to people who keep getting told, you can't possibly do that. And then they go ahead and do it and it works. And I'm saying, yeah, okay, I got your back on this.
I did it. Hey, there's another big event that occurred recently with the collapse of a building down in the southeast Florida, which was just terrible, devastating issue. I wonder if you could comment on that, and also if you think we should be worried that there's going to be other building collapses.
Well, when I saw the video, and there's some really good videos, the structural engineering group they're all over this, but the first thing I thought of was the parking garage failures and collapses that we have in Ontario, and we had in Ontario in the 1990s, and the bridge corrosion, and we had a shopping mall in North Bay, Ontario that collapsed because of saltwater corrosion. In cold climates, we put salt on the roads, right? And the cars carry the salts into the parking garage and the bridges, and the corrosion weakens the steel and it causes it to fail. And I'm thinking right off the bat, this is, saltwater corrosion. My spidey sense is tingling. And then, I'm not involved in this, by the way. Okay. This is total speculation, but the first thing I thought of was, by God, this reminds me of bridges and parking garage failures in Ontario. All right. So that second thing was that I'm following this, and this is, the pool deck is dead flat and there was no water management. And I'm like, and then I found out a little bit other stuff, and the collapse seems to have started where there's a planter located where the wall at the pool deck meets one of the walls. And I'm, in the stuff that we do, waterproofing planters on decks so if anybody ever asked me and said, hey, Joe, I'd probably look at the water management issues at the planters and just take that off the table or not. But, I can't, to this day, we have arguments saying that we don't need to slope our deck. And I'm saying, well, that's crazy. Our waterproofing system is so freaking good, it can be dead flat. And I'm saying, don't be a dope slope. That's our motto. Don't be a freaking dope slope. And inspect like crazy. And so this is going to change things. And there are going to be others. All right? There are going to be others.
Wow. Let's go to the roundup, John. The Roundup is brought to you by April Air, providing healthy humidity, ventilation, and air purity solutions for new and existing homes. April Air, healthy air, healthy home at aprilaire.com. All right, let's go to the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. Final questions or thoughts for Dr. Joe?
Yeah, Joe, you talked about mistakes and looking back on things. Looking back on COVID reaction, what do you think were the biggest mistakes made?
I think people, the mask thing, it was ridiculous. All right. And if you know anything about aerosol transfer, anybody who knows anything about that could tell you right off the bat. And that it took so long for people to even accept that aerosols were the transmission mechanism. It is like, I am not a health professional, but I do know the difference between Newton's law and Stokes' law and viscosity and falling velocities. And come on. Now, if I was in charge, which apparently I'm not, I would improve the filtration and have much higher room air change, but not with outside, just more circulation with filtration. And I think you're crazy to increase the humidity to 40 or 50% as a retrofit. You're going to end up having to build new stuff that's able to handle that level of humidity. And if you are going to double your ventilation rate and want that level of humidity in a cold climate, you're going to need a humidifier. And I view humidifiers as biological weapons. They're bioweapons. And then in the South, you're going to need dehumidifiers. And all over, you're going to need energy recovery ventilators. So I would invest in April Air and a humidifier company that makes whatever infiltration. But apparently I'm just a dumb schmuck engineer living in Boston.
Jump in here, Mr. Consigli, the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli, and chef, executive chef, I should say.
Well, executive chef emeritus, Mr. Paul Lagrange from Baton Rouge, now has taken over the summer camp cooking duties and doing a wonderful job. You know, this was to be our 25th anniversary year. So I got a kick when Joe had to send the cancellation notice out 2 years in a row now. He put in there, next year will be epic.
Epic.
And I was thinking the money plus bin, you know? So maybe it's gonna be summer camp on steroids for the 25th one. So I got a couple little things to add, you know. Joe's kind of entry into the restoration industry and all the help and the training and stuff that he's passed on to our guys over the years is pretty legendary. Him and Mac Pierce are for the 15, 20 years that they presented and worked with the restoration guys. They were at RAA, they were the two most popular and high rated speakers that I can ever remember in the last, quarter of a century. But the way me and Cliff found Joe or heard about him were Joe did a seminar out in Seattle when he was doing early seminar days. And two of our members out there, it was either Seattle or Portland, Reed Dow and Mark Bradley, had told us, they said, there's this guy out there who's really pretty wild. And he talks about all kinds of stuff I think would be helpful for, all the restoration and drying guys. So we said, well, where can we see him? And then he was teaching it at the Merck, the famous Merck with Sue Smith in the Science Center, Philadelphia. So me and Cliff and a couple other guys registered for 4 days that week. We heard Joe for 2 days. And then we had, that's when we met Chin Yang and Phil Morey, I think, in Paul Elringer. So we listened to all this stuff for 4 days. It was pretty enlightening to us. And I remember Joe coming and telling us that, like, we were kind of disruptive. I think this is the reason why Joe kind of, lended to kind of like these restoration guys, because he could relate to us. So Sue Smith went to Joe and said, I remember Joe telling me this, like in the morning of day 2, she said, who are those restoration guys? She says, we're getting all kinds of complaints and everything. They're disruptive. And I said, what did you tell her, Joe? And Joe goes, yeah, aren't they great? You can't make this stuff up. So at that point, we decided that we wanted, through the association, to hire Joe to do a couple seminars for the members. And we did 2 back in the mid-90s. We did a 2-day one in Chicago and then a 2-day one out in Orange County in Costa Mesa. And I remember, things were a little bit more formal in those days, not like business casual. So, Joe used to put those seminars on and be wearing jeans and kind of an open T-shirt or something, whatever, he got that day. And we had to ask him in the agreement to wear a shirt and tie. And anyway, he shows up at the first one in Chicago, day one, wearing the shirt and tie. He looks so uncomfortable. It's unbelievable. By the first break, he loosened the tie. After lunch, he has the jacket off. And finally, we told him, Joe, yeah, the hell with the suit for day 2. And anyway, and he was a lot more comfortable, and he kind of went from there. And, and that led to really a long and beautiful relationship for many years. And that's how the restoration guys got involved in building science. And now, for many years, it's really a mainstay of our training and all of our certification. It's a basic prerequisite. As far as summer camp is concerned, I have my favorite Joe line. Now, Joe has a lot of lines, but this is my Pete Consigli personal favorite. When Joe was telling the story about when I insulted him, I didn't realize Joe made his bones insulting somebody. And I not that I made my bones, but I kind of got the cooking thing out of my system because I insulted Joe. And next thing you know, I got this summer camp job. But when I told him, I could do better, he gives me his credit card. And I said, what's this? And actually his exact words were, impress us. And now this quiet falls over all the summer camp people. And it's like, ooh, there's like going to be a throwdown here. So I said, okay, well, what do I do? He says, well, just, impress us. So I said, okay. So I go, first thing I said, so do I have a budget? He goes, no budget. So, all right. And then he says this, he goes, you couldn't spend all the money that's in that credit card if you tried. Well, that was the end of that. I didn't need any more thing. We went, it was like supermarket sweepstakes because I had to put my first meal together in 4 or 5 hours. And we got the carts and we just literally were running down the aisles, pulling stuff off the shelf. We didn't even have a shopping list. We got back anyway. We did the first meal. And then I remember he said, that was like on the Sunday. He said, you were able to whip this together so quick. And I said, well, restoration guys, you had an emergency. We took care of it. And he said, well, what happens if we gave you a couple of days to prepare? What could you do? He said, could you cook dinner on Tuesday night for everyone after the seminar? I said, yeah, I could do that. He said, what will you do? I said, well, I'll do a Sicilian feast. He go, what's that? I said, well, it's like Thanksgiving on steroids. And that, of course, that didn't need any explanation. That was the beginning of the Sicilian night that we had for many years. And when my mom was alive, she worked in the kitchen for many years with this. Anyway, here's my favorite Joe line. About year 10 or year 12 of summer camp, I don't remember what happened, but there was a little banter going on, and Joe's telling a story about somebody asked, how did this whole summer camp, thing start, blah, blah, blah. And Joe tells the story, and then he makes this comment. He says, Consigli is the only guy that has no budget and can manage to exceed it. And anyway, that got a big laugh. But of course, most people don't realize I actually was pretty diligent, even though I had no budget, and I was able to negotiate, service as part of the deal, and we wound up getting our own checkout line and everything, and then delivering the goods, and the whole thing evolved to him building the kitchen. I mean, he tells the story that if he didn't build a kitchen, he probably would have been divorced. He had to get me out of the house, and we were running out of space. I mean, there's a lot of other summer camp stories, but anyway, those are just a couple of the early day ones. Anyway, Joe was. I enjoyed the interview today. There was quite a lot of the early history and a lot of that stuff you haven't talked about before. So I thought that was great, and it was a lot of fun. I can't believe that the years passed this quickly, and next year it'll be the 25th, and I guess, like you said, it'll be epic. So you got a lot of people that I got to think it's going to sell out earlier than any other summer camp in history. Usually by the 4th of July, they usually sell out, or late June, but something tells me this one's going to sell out pretty quick. So got a lot of people are looking forward to it. You got at least a half a dozen people that are on this call today that have been long-term summer camp people. And anyway, great interview. And I'll turn it back over to you there, Mr. Radio Joe. And then, since this is the last show before you guys take your summer break, any news, Mr. Radio Joe, on what we got? Anything planned for after you guys come back after Labor Day, when you come back from your summer break? Got anybody booked yet?
Yeah, I might have one or two people. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Joe's going to rejoin us when we come back. And we're going to talk about moisture control for residential buildings. So, Joe, could you give us a teaser on what we'll be discussing when we come back from our break?
Well, how to build highly energy efficient buildings that don't rot and don't make you sick, and don't basically make you broke. So basically, I guess 45 years of my dealing with stuff, I thought, well, okay, let's pull it all together. And so that's the plan.
And we're looking forward to it. Thanks so much for joining us this week. And we look forward to seeing you again when we come back. And this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guest, Dr. Joe Lstiburek, the life and times of the Dean of Building Science. I want to thank the Z-Man, my co-host. John, you got to have faith at the controls, the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli, most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners and sponsors. We'll be back. Actually, we're going to do a couple flashback shows over the next couple of weeks. So please check those out. They're always good because we pick some of the best. And then we'll be back in less than a month with Dr. Joe Lstiburek, Part 2.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.